There is a very specific kind of discomfort that doesn't come from fear, anger, or sadness but from sound. A fork scraping a plate, someone chewing. A pen clicking, loud breathing, sudden noises that seem harmless to everyone else but feel unbearable, invasive, even enraging to you. Your body reacts before your mind can explain why. Muscles tense, heart rate spikes, irritation floods in instantly. And the most confusing part is this. You know the reaction is disproportionate, yet you can't stop it. This experience is often dismissed as being too sensitive or dramatic, but the psychology of people who can't stand loud or specific noises, commonly referred to as misophonia, has nothing to do with weakness, intolerance, or lack of self-control. It has everything to do with how the nervous system processes threat, attention, and emotional salience. Misophonia is not simply disliking sounds. It is a neurological emotional response pattern. Certain sounds bypass conscious filtering and then go straight to the limbic system, the part of the brain responsible for emotion and threat detection. The reaction is fast, automatic, and deeply physical. For people with misophonia, sound is not background, it is intrusion. One of the first things to understand is that misophonia is not about volume alone. Some loud sounds don't trigger it at all, while some quiet, repetitive sounds are intolerable. This tells us something crucial. The issue is not hearing sensitivity. It's meaning. The brain assigns emotional significance to specific sounds, often sounds associated with unpredictability, loss of control, or social boundary violation. Once that association is formed, the sound becomes a trigger. The nervous system reacts as if something threatening is happening even when nothing objectively dangerous exists. This is why misophonia reactions feel irrational but uncontrollable. Another key psychological factor is attentional capture. Trigger sounds hijack attention completely. You can't ignore them because your brain treats them as urgent signals. All cognitive resources are pulled toward the sound. This creates frustration because you're forced to attend to something you desperately want to escape. That forced attention feels violating. People with misophonia often describe feeling trapped. You can't leave, you can't make the sound stop. You can't explain your reaction without sounding unreasonable. That sense of helplessness amplifies the emotional response. Anger often appears not because of the sound itself, but because of powerlessness. Another critical layer is nervous system sensitivity. Many people with misophonia have highly responsive nervous systems. They process sensory input deeply and intensely. This sensitivity is not limited to sound, it often extends to light, texture, emotion, and social nuance. Their system notices everything, and it does not filter gently. This heightened sensitivity means the threshold for overload is lower. When a trigger sound appears, it pushes the system past capacity instantly. The reaction is not chosen. It's the nervous system protecting itself from overload. Another misunderstood aspect is the emotional intensity of the reaction. People with misophonia often feel shame about how strong their response is. Rage, panic, disgust. The intensity feels out of proportion to the situation. This leads to self-judgment, but intensity does not equal immaturity. It equals neurological amplification. Another important psychological truth is that misophonia often develops through conditioning. A sound becomes associated with stress, irritation, or lack of control. Over time, the brain learns the association and reacts automatically. Once learned, the response is hard to unlearn through willpower alone. There is also a strong link between misophonia and hypervigilance. Many people with this sensitivity grew up in environments where they had to stay alert. Noise signaled unpredictability. Conflict, intrusion. Their nervous system learned to treat sound as information. Even years later, the body remembers. Another layer involves boundaries. Trigger sounds often involve other people's bodily functions or behaviors: chewing, breathing, tapping. These sounds cross an invisible boundary. They enter your space without consent. For people who are already sensitive to boundaries, this feels invasive. Sound has no walls. Another psychological factor is emotional containment. Many people with misophonia are highly self-controlled. They suppress reactions, they don't lash out. They internalize discomfort. This internalization builds pressure. The longer the sound continues, the more intense the reaction becomes. The anger isn't impulsive, it's accumulated. Another truth is that misophonia reactions are often accompanied by an urge to escape, leave the room, cover ears, create distance. This is not avoidance, it is regulation. The nervous system is trying to return to baseline. The problem is that social norms often prevent escape. You're expected to tolerate, to stay polite, to endure. That forced endurance increases distress. Another misunderstood aspect is that misophonia is not the same as general anxiety. Many people with misophonia are calm, capable, and grounded most of the time. The reaction is specific, not global. That specificity confuses others. How can you handle stress but not this sound? Because the trigger bypasses logic. Another psychological layer is identity. People with misophonia often feel misunderstood. They learn to hide their reactions. To adapt silently, this creates isolation. They feel alone with an experience that's hard to explain. Silence becomes survival. Another important truth is that misophonia is not about wanting silence. Many people with misophonia enjoy music, conversation, and rich soundscapes. The issue is not sound itself. It is uncontrollable, repetitive, or socially intrusive sound. Context matters. Another layer involves cognitive empathy. People with misophonia are often acutely aware that others aren't doing anything wrong. This awareness creates internal conflict. You're angry, but you don't want to be. That conflict intensifies stress. You feel trapped between reaction and morality. Another psychological factor is sensory injustice. When someone else's behavior creates discomfort you can't escape, it feels unfair. That unfairness fuels anger, especially when others minimize the experience. Your overreacting is not neutral. It invalidates the nervous system. Another important aspect is fatigue. Misophonia reactions are exhausting. The constant need to regulate, escape, or suppress drains energy. Over time, this can lead to irritability, withdrawal, or emotional numbness, not because the person is difficult, because their system is overworked. If you recognize yourself in this, it's important to hear this clearly. Misophonia is not a character flaw. It is not a lack of tolerance. It is a neuroemotional response pattern that developed for a reason. Another crucial layer in the psychology of people who can't stand loud or specific noises is the relationship between sound and control. Sound is unique among sensory inputs because it cannot be easily blocked. You can close your eyes, you can look away, you can step back from touch, but sound penetrates. It enters whether you consent or not. For people with misophonia, this lack of control is central. The nervous system experiences certain sounds as violations of autonomy. This is why the emotional reaction is often not just discomfort, but anger. Anger is a boundary emotion. It arises when something enters your space without permission and you cannot stop it. The sound itself may be small, but the boundary breach feels large. Another psychological dimension is predictability. Trigger sounds are often repetitive and irregular at the same time: chewing, tapping, sniffing, clicking. The brain cannot predict exactly when the next sound will occur, so it stays on high alert. This constant vigilance exhausts the nervous system. Anticipation becomes as distressing as the sound itself. This is why people with misophonia often report that the moment before the sound is sometimes worse than the sound. The body braces, muscles tighten, breath shortens, the system is preparing for impact. Another important layer is emotional association. Trigger sounds are frequently tied to relational contexts. Family dinners, classrooms, offices, spaces where the person felt trapped, unheard, or powerless. Over time, the sound becomes linked not just to irritation, but to relational stress. The sound carries memory. This is also why misophonia often begins or intensifies during adolescence. This is a period when autonomy is limited, emotions are intense, and environments are often inescapable. The nervous system learns which stimuli signal distress. Another psychological truth is that misophonia reactions are immediate because they bypass conscious thought. The auditory cortex connects directly to emotional processing centers. This shortcut exists for survival. But in misophonia, the system misclassifies certain sounds as threats. Once the pathway is established, it fires automatically. This is why telling someone with misophonia to calm down or ignore it is ineffective. The reaction has already occurred before conscious awareness catches up. Another layer is emotional suppression. Many people with misophonia are highly socially aware. They know their reaction will not be understood. So they suppress it, they hold still, they stay quiet, they endure. Suppression does not remove the reaction, it stores it. Over time, this stored tension can erupt as irritability, withdrawal, or emotional exhaustion. Not because the person is unstable, but because their system is under constant strain. Another important factor is fairness perception. People with misophonia often feel that they are the ones who must adapt. They wear headphones, they leave rooms. They tolerate discomfort. Others are rarely asked to adjust. This perceived imbalance fuels resentment. The anger is not about the sound alone. It's about carrying the burden alone. Another psychological dimension is identity erosion. Repeated invalidation, being told you're overreacting, dramatic, or difficult, leads people with misophonia to doubt their own experience. They may start questioning their sanity, their legitimacy. This self-doubt increases stress and sensitivity. Another important aspect is that misophonia often coexists with high conscientiousness. Many affected individuals care deeply about social harmony. They don't want to inconvenience others, they don't want to make demands. This creates an internal conflict, intense discomfort paired with reluctance to assert needs. That conflict amplifies distress. Another truth is that misophonia is context-sensitive. The same sound can be tolerable in one situation and unbearable in another. A loved one chewing may trigger rage, while a stranger doing the same does not, or vice versa. This inconsistency confuses people, but it makes sense psychologically. Context determines perceived safety, control, and meaning. Another layer involves emotional bandwidth. When someone is already stressed, tired, or emotionally taxed, misophonia reactions intensify. The nervous system has less capacity to absorb additional stimulation. Trigger sounds push it over the edge. This is why misophonia often feels worse at the end of the day. Another important psychological truth is that people with misophonia often develop sophisticated coping strategies: music, white noise, strategic seating, planning exits. These strategies are not weakness, they are adaptive intelligence. They are ways of negotiating a world not designed for sensitive nervous systems. Another misunderstood aspect is that misophonia does not mean intolerance of people. Many affected individuals are deeply compassionate. They understand intellectually that others are not doing anything wrong. This cognitive empathy creates guilt about their own reaction. Guilt does not reduce the reaction, it adds another layer of stress. Another psychological dimension is the relationship between misophonia and self-image. People who see themselves as calm, rational, or kind are often disturbed by their own intense reactions. This internal contradiction creates shame. I shouldn't feel this way, but I do. That internal battle is exhausting. Another layer is the role of repetition. The longer a trigger sound continues, the more intense the reaction becomes. This is not linear irritation, it is escalation. Each repetition compounds the previous one. The nervous system does not reset between sounds. This is why brief exposure may be manageable, but prolonged exposure feels unbearable. Another important truth is that misophonia reactions often come with intrusive urges: yelling, fleeing, covering ears. These urges are not intentions, they are stress responses. The person does not want to act on them, they want the sensation to stop. Understanding this distinction matters. Another psychological factor is that misophonia often improves when the person feels empowered. When they can leave, when they can use headphones without shame, when they can name the issue without ridicule. Control reduces intensity, safety quiets the nervous system. Another layer is that misophonia often coexists with deep focus. People who are easily disrupted by sound are often capable of intense concentration in silence. Their minds go deep. Sound pulls them out abruptly. That abruptness feels violent to attention. Another overlooked aspect is that misophonia reactions are rarely about the present moment alone. They accumulate across days, weeks, years. Each exposure leaves a trace. Without recovery, those traces stack. Understanding this explains why tolerance decreases over time. If you experience misophonia, the most important thing to understand is this: your reaction is not a moral failure. It is not a lack of patience. It is not a flaw in character. It is a nervous system doing its job too intensely. Your sensitivity likely allows you to perceive things others miss. Emotional nuance, environmental shifts, subtle changes. That same sensitivity makes certain sounds intolerable. The goal is not to eliminate sensitivity, it is to support it. Support looks like boundaries, not endurance. Validation, not dismissal. Choice, not coercion. Understanding the psychology of people who can't stand loud or specific noises replaces shame with clarity. It reframes misophonia as a regulatory issue, not a personality defect. It explains why the reaction is instant, intense, and hard to control. You don't react this way because you're weak. You react this way because your system is fast, alert, and sensitive. And sensitivity, when understood and respected, is not a liability, it is information.